Okay, when you're older, let's say that you're in your, let's say when you're, I don't know, late teens, early 20s, and you're suffering from abuse. Let's say you're suffering from abuse at home. Why are you being abused at home? What's the cause of it?
Parental problems.
Okay, like what? What's that? Bills. So they're angry because they don't have enough money, and so because of that stress, it then causes them to take it out on you. And it doesn't have to just be physical; it could be verbal as well. You know, maybe you leave the light on, and then Dad's pissed off because there's, you know, money's not where he wants it to be. So he gets pissed off and he yells at you for having the lights on. It's not just about having the lights on. Now he starts yelling about everything else. Now you don't appreciate him, and you know, if you don't like it, you can get the hell out. It slams doors, and now you're always, you know, afraid of making some mistake. You know, maybe I shouldn't, you know, you're worried about having the lights on too much, or maybe you run the water too long when you're making, you know, pasta or whatever. But the idea is that it's because you're older, you have a skill set to understand why that's happening now. Now, when you're 6 years old, 5 years old, what's the cause of the abuse? Why are you being abused?
Because you don't understand.
Yeah, it's your fault. Yeah, it's your fault, right? Because you're 5, and therefore it must be your fault. So you start trying to figure out what you did wrong, and then you develop this really unhealthy relationship with people being angry with you, where now you think that every time someone's angry with you, you have to fix it. Because at 5 years old, you don't have a concept of bills and stress and any of that stuff. So in other words, what I'm saying is that it isn't your fault, but you take it on as though it's your fault because you don't have the skill set for understanding that it's not your fault. And then you go through life, and it's unconscious even, because it happens to you before 5 years old. It's not in your long-term memory. And even if it happens to you after that, you don't have the skill set for understanding that it wasn't your fault. So then it becomes deeply embedded in your psychology. So even if you can mouth the words, it's not my fault. If someone's angry, it's not my fault. My parents angry with me, it's not my fault. You still have this type of anxiety that if you're with your friends, if you're with your family, if you're with your significant other, maybe if people get into bad moods, you feel like it's your fault. You get anxious about it. You get nervous about it. And I wonder if some of you have that, where, you know, if your friends are in a bad mood, if your family's in a bad mood, or your significant other's in a bad mood, you're like, oh, what did I do wrong? How do I fix this? And we constantly feel like it's our job to fix those things. And it's not your fault. It's not your job to fix the world. But if, as a little kid, you don't have a concept of anything outside, because when we're little, we don't have the ability to understand things outside here. We only have access to our own internal dialogues. So then we start to think, well, it must be my fault. So somehow, how do I fix this? Why is Dad yelling at me about the lights? Because I left the lights on. No. If you're 18, you can look back on it and go, he's yelling at me because of a complex interplay between him and his boss, where he's not getting the money that he thinks he needs, and then, of course, the rising cost of inflation. You can start to reason that out and understand and go, so you're displacing your anger. At 5 years old, you say, my fault. How do I fix it? And then that becomes part of your personality type, your character type. So it takes having to unlearn some of those things. And so yeah, these are examples of the kinds of monsters that you can have inside of you. Now, we all have them, but monsters can also, these are things that will consume you, but they can also be other things that are far more, I don't want to say damaging, because they're all going to be damaging, but far more explosive, things like maybe anger. If you have anger issues, we say, you know, why do we get angry? You know, there's reasons for it. I mean, I know some people, my goodness, they're so incredibly angry, and they don't seem to have a reason for it. Of course, there's a reason for it, but you know, we don't necessarily know what it is. But when you look at their life, it's like everything seems to go well, but man, they just go off on a second's notice. You know, and sometimes we have to confront that anger. You have to confront that monster. I remember if it was in this class, I was talking last week about like people who will get really angry with somebody, and then they'll punch the wall because they get so mad. And then afterwards, they're just like, they can't believe they did it, and they're just like, oh my God, I have no idea why I did that. That's not me. I wouldn't do that. Did a ghost punch the wall? No, bro, you punched the wall. So that means that it is who you are. It's who you are in that specific circumstance under those conditions. And that's why it's important for us to acknowledge those monsters about ourselves. Because now you know, okay, if I get pushed to that limit, if I go past that, my anger, that's where I start punching walls. Now, if you realize that about yourself, I wonder at what point you start punching people. Well, I would never do that. Wouldn't you have also said that about the wall as well? You never, if you ask most people, like, do you like to go around punching walls, you angry? Of course not. But once you find yourself going past that line, you have to acknowledge it about yourself, because now you have to wonder what else you're capable of that you never realized that you were capable of. So what that means is you have to acknowledge it about yourself, and then recognize that when you're getting to that point, you have to stop yourself. Because once you're past that, it's anyone's guess where you're going to go, because it's unexplored territory. You haven't learned that about yourself just yet. I was talking last week about the need to have an internal monster, but the ability to control it so that if you're over here talking to somebody, but then the need arises, you can cross that line, become the monster, but then also bring yourself back across that line in a controlled way. Once it's uncontrollable, who knows where it goes from there? So the first thing is to acknowledge yourself and say, once I go past that line, that monster overtakes me, and I become the thing that I'm staring into. I become the abyss that I'm staring into. And then once I can recognize that, now I know that if I'm having an argument with somebody, friends, family, significant other, whatever, that when you find yourself being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed towards that line, now you can take responsibility for it and say, listen, we need to stop talking right now. We need to go our separate ways. We need time to cool off. Maybe you don't, but I certainly do, because otherwise I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose it. And if that person keeps pushing you, pushing you, pushing you, and you're trying not to, and you go over that line, you start punching walls, then the person sees that. And by the way, that's a very difficult thing to undo now, because now you can't unring that bell. You're always going to be the person who punches walls, and even if you only did it one time. And that person, if they're the kind of person who knows that you're like that and keeps pushing you, pushing you, pushing you, I don't like using the word because it's so hacky, but I'll use it anyway. It's a very toxic personality. And that's a person who enjoys seeing you get angry. And there are these people. I have two very good friends. I'm just bragging. I have two friends. I have these two very good friends who are dating now. And I hope they don't watch these videos. One of them is he's very zen. He's like totally just like chill. Hey, what's up? And it's funny. He has a nickname. His nickname is Savage. But he's really chill. And he doesn't smoke any weed at all. This guy's just naturally chill. He listens to reggae, still no drugs. And if you can tell him like, hey man, the world is just evaporating around us. I don't know, Russia just not launched nuclear weapons as we're all going to die. He'll sit there and go, oh, cool man. It's happening for a reason. I can't wait to find out what the reason is, man. Anyway, he does music. Hey, listen to my track. And then I introduced him to this girl, and she's the complete opposite. She's the complete opposite. And she's gotten crazier since then. So then I thought, this will be a great matchup, her and Savage. And sure enough, he's like totally chill, and she's like, it's unbelievable. Like I ask him, I'll tell them like I'm just losing my shit, and I'll be so pissed off, and he'll be like, well, tell me what's going on, let's work this out together. She's like, it's like a real relationship. Because every relationship she's been in so far has been pretty chaotic and hectic, because she attracts chaos and hecticness. Of course, he's totally chill, which means he doesn't date very much. So then the two of them together, it's funny because she'll tell me like, it's weird, it's like I want to push his buttons just to see if I can make him mad. And she's like, and the more pissed off I try to get him, the more relaxed he is, and all of a sudden I find myself totally relaxed. I'm like, yeah, it's like kind of that give and take. I say, that sounds like you're trying to unlock a monster in him, and that's what it is. That she wants to see where that line is, because she wants to see how far he can go. And he's an interesting guy. His name, again, we call him Savage, and that's not just a silly nickname. He's a hell of a fighter. He's a really good fighter. He's great at jiu-jitsu. He fights in Muay Thai. I think he's had a couple boxing matches, I think. He's a hell of a fighter. But you'd never know it from talking to the guy. But once that line is crossed, oh yeah, he's ready to go. He's ready to go. And so he's able to control that. And that's a pretty impressive thing to be able to do that. But we all have these monsters inside of us. And it's important for us to know what they are and to acknowledge them. Because if you don't acknowledge it, that's the thing that's going to hit you out of nowhere. You're never going to see it coming, because you're going to be walking around saying, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. I would never do something like that. And all of a sudden you're past that line, and you're punching walls, and you're punching people, and you're trying to convince yourself, like, oh my God, I would never do that. you've got to be aware of where that line is with yourself. You have to be aware of where that line is with your loved ones as well. But one of the analogies that I use when I talk about this is the analogy of the dragons. You guys heard stories about dragons, yes? Yeah. What do dragons do?
Breathe fire.
Breathe fire. Yeah, where do they live? Caves, islands, castles. Yeah. And what are they guarding? Gold. And a princess. Does that seem weird to anybody? If you're a dragon, what need do you have for like a castle or even like a cave? What need do you have for gold? What need do you have for a princess? There's no need for any of these things, but we just kind of presume that's what a dragon does. Now there's a reason for that, because a dragon is something that represents these monsters inside of us. So of course now the dragon breathes fire. What does fire represent? Anger, yeah. So now we got to figure out, so there's this monster inside of us that breathes anger and hatred. And of course, what are the things that the monster is guarding are, significant others, love, romance, money, with gold, castle or a nice house in a cave, status. So these are the three things that seem to drive us the craziest. Trying to find romance, money, and status. And these are the things that a lot of times will bring out the worst in us. And so what do you have to do? Well, you've got to slay the dragon. You have to at least control the dragon. But think about, so who goes and slays the dragon? The knight. And what does the knight show? What is the knight wearing? Armor. I'll let you think about that for a second. So the knight's wearing armor. What's the armor made of? Metal. Is there anything worse that you can wear if you're going to go fight a fire-breathing dragon than metal? He shows up, he breathes fire, you're basically wearing an oven. It's going to cook you. So the knight shows up and he's brave and says, I'm going to fight this dragon. And he's completely ill-prepared for it. He's not just wearing the wrong thing, he's wearing the complete opposite of what you should be wearing. But this is also, by the way, how we deal with a lot of times with the monsters in us. This is how we deal with the dragons. We don't just deal with it in a way that's not productive. We actually deal with it in a way that's actually bad for us. We try to suppress it, or we try to displace it. We put it onto other people, or we try to ignore it. We say, I'm angry, I need to go, whatever, run up a mountain or whatever. And yeah, it kind of goes out of you for a little bit, but all you're doing is you're suppressing it. When you come back down that mountain, the problem is still there unless you've figured out a way to deal with that problem. All these monsters that are in us, they're going to remain inside of us. Yes. It's a combination between you and us. They're going to remain inside of you. They're going to remain inside of us until we figure out a way of dealing with it. And the worst way of dealing with it, by the way, like I said, is to wear some armor that's just going to cook us inside. It's going to make things worse. And that's the way we approach our problems a lot of times. We try to solve them by doing things that actually make things worse. So first and foremost, we have to know what the dragon is. We have to know where it resides. We have to know what it's guarding, the thing that we're trying to acquire. We have to understand that if we approach it the wrong way, it's going to burn us alive. And we also have to understand that the knight doesn't always win. When the knight crosses that bridge and he looks off to the sides, he sees piles of bones of knights who have come before them. And so we have to be aware that those things are not necessarily going to be wins for us. So we have to deal with the monster. We have to be aware of how dangerous it is. And we have to be aware that if we gaze into something for long enough, especially the darknesses, whatever those monster things are that are in us, if we gaze long enough, we become that thing. And this is one of those things that's really difficult for a lot of us. If we surround ourselves with stuff, we become the stuff that we surround ourselves with. Anybody ever been like a good kid in a bad group, and then one day all of a sudden the whole bad group goes, you know what? We need to be more like you. And all of a sudden became good? Anybody ever see somebody before who was the good kid in the bad group who becomes bad?
Yeah.
And that's because you have to be an absolute ocean of virtue to take in even just a little bit of a stream of evil and not become polluted. It's difficult. I mean, if we're in a pool together and I'm standing next to you and I go, I'm sorry, better yet, we're in a bathtub together. Don't ask, okay? It's only weird if you ask. And we're in the bathtub together, and I go, guess what? What? I just peed. If you weren't jumping out of the bathtub earlier, you'd be jumping out now. Now, if we're standing in a pool together, and I go, guess what? Did you pee again? I peed again. It's not as bad because you're in a pool. You know, you might be like, oh, dude, what the hell's wrong with you? First you're in the bathtub with me, now you're peeing. Now if we're in the ocean, and I'm like, hey, guess what? You peed. Yeah, I peed. Not so bad, because you're in it. I mean, you're starting to enjoy it, but we're in an ocean. The bigger the body of water, the less that pollution is going to affect you. You have to be an absolute ocean of virtue in order to receive a little bit of pollution and not become polluted yourself. We have to be aware of it, so we have to become virtuous, I guess. We have to know what that thing is, and we have to be very careful about the little streams of influence that we allow into us, because every little stream impacts us in some way. And whatever those monsters are, how it is that we affect them, how it is that we affect them is going to affect us. If we affect it by trying to suppress it and push it down, well, it's going to pop up at some point. Everything does. Everything comes back. There are no exceptions. Or if we can deal with it in such a way that now we've addressed it and it's in our past because we're not afraid of it, then that's fine. And that's probably the thing to do when you find out what the monsters are. When the dragon shows up to you and is like, he's at your front door, he's like, oh, good, you're here. Come on in. I need to talk to you. And the monster comes in and sits down on your couch, and now you can interview it. Find out, so what brings you here, monster? You know, I'm angry. Okay, well, good. Okay, so you speak English. We can talk. What are you angry about? You know, and then, you know, you left the light on. Okay, and then maybe like an hour into the conversation with yourself, you can sit there and realize that the monster is saying, it wasn't my fault when I was 5 years old and I couldn't fix that thing. I feel like everything is my fault now. I struggle with guilt. I can't deal with everything, and that makes me angry because now I feel like I'm not good enough. You know, you go, I'm glad we've had this breakthrough, monster. You know, or whatever that monster is. You have to find out what it wants. Don't shoot away. Don't suppress it. Deal with it. And after you deal with it, then go run your mouth and listen to your music or whatever. And you'll be able to do it with a much lighter spirit than before. Questions? Comments? Concerns? Complaints? Criticisms? Happy Wednesday.